This
We sure
conference
can.
will now be recorded.
We are going to record Crystal's presentation for CLE purposes and for her to be able to share with her clients. I can hear you great. Thank you, Crystal.
Great. Thanks, Cindy. I appreciate the introduction. I am so honored to be able to present to all of you today. This is, I'm not only an attorney, but I'm also a business owner. So this pandemic has had multiple impacts on me, both personally, my business, and my clients' businesses. So I'm looking at this really from a lot of different directions. I wear a lot of different hats, and so it gives me some perspective as to how we look at what does business look like going forward. And that's really what I want to talk about today is, we're here, this is where we're at. We have this pandemic, that's our new reality. So what are we going to do to move forward? Because we need to move forward. And we need some hope and some good news that we're going to be able to maybe not do business as usual, but we're going to be able to continue business. So I'd like to just go on to the next slide. And I really, really appreciated the presentations earlier from the state and county health perspective, what's going on with the governor's orders, with the county variances. It's all really important information for the businesses. So I won't touch too much on that because that's been covered really, really thoroughly. But we'll also talk about employees, 1099 contracts, training policies, internal contract reviews, also external contract reviews, insurance reviews and updates, business opportunities and expansion, financial management, partnership and shareholder agreements, and succession planning, both for your business and your personal estate planning. So those are the highlights, what I'd like to talk about today. And let me just mention, as I'm speaking and giving this presentation, if you have any questions, please put those questions in the chat box, and Cindy's going to be monitoring that. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions about some of these things, and I'd like to be able to leave some time at the end to address those questions. So if we could go to the next slide, the state, county, and the state and county health requirements. So, we're seeing some of these things change rapidly. This is, a moving target constantly. So it's been discussed thoroughly today. I really appreciate from the previous presentations, the explanation about the governor's order, and now essentially the county variances that have been in place are now moot. However, we might see some unexpected changes upcoming. So I really recommend as a business owner that you are staying up to date with your county and with what the governor's office is issuing. And it's really healthy for as a business owner to make sure you understand those thoroughly. So I won't spend too much time on this one because it's been covered, but let's maybe move on and talk about what we should be doing with our employees, with our subcontractors, and how we should be looking at our business training and policies. So as we've been working through this, both myself and my own business and then representing our business clients, we've been getting a lot of questions about what is good faith efforts for making sure not only our employees and staff are staying healthy, but also making sure that our customers are staying healthy. What kinds of things should we be doing? What kinds of creative things can we be thinking about? There's very little guidance about what that good faith requirement might be. So we've come up with a couple of ideas that we've been talking to a lot of our clients about, and we're hearing that other businesses are implementing. So one of the first things is that you may want to think about having some safety training or some weekly or periodic updates with all of your staff, your employees, your subcontractors, and if there are updates, what those are, what those health updates are. You may consider even putting together an acknowledgement form where your employees and your subcontractors may be required to say they've acknowledged that they've read the health requirements, and then they understand them, and that they agree to abide by those. In particular, we're seeing some businesses, when you go in, you might see employees that have a mask on. You might see another employee that takes it off, and there may be some inconsistencies there. So we recommend that in order to have some consistencies, that you have some sort of policy in place that identifies what you're going to require based on the governor's orders and the health department, and make sure that your employees understand that. And having them sign an acknowledgement page is a great place to start, because then everybody is on the same page. And I think especially right now, that's really critical, so that there's no confusion. Well, can I take my mask off if I'm doing this activity? Should I leave it on for this activity? There should be some consistency across your business and how you're going to handle that. So an acknowledgement form, along with some updated written policies about what you're doing, is a good idea. In addition to your updated written policies, you might consider updating those policies as we phase into some new normalcy. Because as we know, right now, we heard in the previous presentation, right now there's some tiered phases. We're looking at possibly 3 phases of reopening businesses. So maybe your policies should track along those phases and make sure that everybody understands what those are. Another thing that is a good idea to consider is possibly having some safety training by professionals. So maybe you can work with your county health department to come in and give a presentation, or do a presentation by Zoom or GoToMeeting or even conference call to talk about safety planning, things that your departments, your employees need to be thinking about. OSHA has been putting out some information on their website about safety training with COVID. I think safety training is a really great way to show good faith effort from a business perspective, that you are doing what you can with the information you have to make sure that not only your employees are safe, but your customers are safe also. What to do if an employee is sick? That's a big one. So the first thing that I recommend and we're hearing a lot of businesses doing this, some businesses are actually requiring that their employees have to have their temperature taken before they come in to work. Is that required? Is that necessary? Again, those need to be considered based on what the current orders are and what your health department recommends. But if an employee is sick, the first and foremost is don't come to work. You don't want to expose anyone if you're sick. And that should just be a good policy regardless of a pandemic or not. The last thing you need is a sick employee coming to work, spreading their germs to other people in the office, customers, or anything like that. So that should be made part of your policy, and that should be made very clear to your employees. The second thing is, if they're exhibiting symptoms of COVID, they need to get tested. So you need to have something in place to make sure that those employees can get the right care, make sure that they know who is doing the testing. I think there's been some confusion about where do I go to get testing, if I need testing, and that kind of thing. So I think providing maybe an information sheet to your employees is a good idea, and that can be, again, part of your policies. And I recommend that you work with your county health department on some of these policies, because they're looking at this every day, day in and day out. So they've got some great information to help you with that. Then the other thing that we recommend is modifying a work from home schedule versus in the office schedule. This has been a huge disruption to businesses of all sizes and all industries. So maybe instead of having everybody come back to work all at once, maybe you start implementing some sort of an alternating day. So there's less people in the office, less people that are maybe being in close quarters with each other. Those are a few ideas that we are talking to folks about, and we're hearing that other people are implementing. But I think the big thing about this is you need to have policies in place. If you don't have any policies, you need to have them. If you currently have policies, you need to review those with your attorneys, maybe even with the health department, to make sure that you're in compliance and make sure that you're adding information that addresses these issues. That's kind of the big takeaway from that. And then the next thing that businesses should really consider is contract review. When we're looking at contract reviews, if we could go to the next slide, this is a really good time to look at your contracts, and many companies have already experienced this. There have been interruptions in their supply chain. There have been interruptions in their ability to perform, or some other company's ability to perform in a performance-based contract. They're already having to pull out their indemnification agreements, looking at their termination clauses, force majeure clauses. A lot of companies are already experiencing some of this. So I think it's important to pull out all the contracts that are applicable to your business at this time and look at, do they need to be updated? Is this something that can be renegotiated? Is this something that we can maybe add some addendums to your existing contracts to make sure that we're addressing some of these issues? It's not a bad idea to add some contingency language in existing contracts, or add some addendums that are going to address pandemic, that maybe provide extension of time clauses or contingency clauses that would enable business to perform on their contract. And then indemnity. What if, in supply chains, we're seeing a lot of issues with supply chains being able to bring in products, and for businesses that are even, especially if they are essential businesses that need certain products, they can't get them because the supply chain has been interrupted. So what does the liability look like? What do your indemnification clauses look like? And then another biggie is the insurance clauses in each contract. Sometimes there's provisions in a contract and sometimes there aren't. If there is insurance that applies in a contract, you need to know what that is and if it applies. We're seeing some businesses right now that are having to make claims on their insurance. And in a lot of cases, insurance companies are now explaining to their insured that, oh, guess what? We've decided COVID is not going to be covered under our insurance plans. So there's a lot of issues going on with insurance right now, and I'll talk more about that later in another slide. But it's a good idea to make sure you understand what insurance provisions apply in your contracts, because there may be some areas that you can explore as far as getting some relief through the insurance or the indemnity clauses of those agreements. And then also look at your termination clauses. What does the termination clause allow? Does it need to be amended to address these pandemic issues? And then moving forward, not beyond just what your existing contracts look like, what is a new contract going to look like? If you're getting ready to enter into a contract for a business coming up, or some new scope of business, what are the new clauses that you should be including in those contracts? And I can give you an example. Right now, we are negotiating a contract for a client. We're putting in specific pandemic language. We're putting in specific clauses that address the ability to work from home. We're putting in some clauses related to insurance coverages and indemnification. We're also putting in some new language that we've never typically used in our force majeure clauses that would help to address the event of a government or health department stepping in and shutting down a business or restricting the amount of business. So I think those are some things that it's good to make sure that you visit with your attorneys with these, in light of these new situations, to make sure that your new contracts are relevant and updated and address these kinds of situations moving forward. Unfortunately, right now we're having to react because a lot of businesses just weren't prepared for this. A lot of contracts didn't contemplate this kind of situation. So we're in the place of reacting right now. But what we like to get to now with our contracts is a place of being prepared and being ready for whatever might happen in the future. Because I think the thing that most businesses are realizing is this is probably, there's a chance that this could happen again. We don't want to see it happen again, but we need to make sure we're prepared just in case it does happen again. It's better to be addressing things from a preventative perspective rather than a reactive perspective. So that's what we'd like to see in our contracts. Moving on to the next slide, and I think this is one, discussing insurance. This is one we are really, really spending some time on right now, is understanding insurance, what applies and what doesn't apply. So, a lot of businesses are learning that their insurance, maybe they didn't have certain clauses or certain addendums that should have been included in their insurance, such as business interruption insurance, civil authority coverage clauses, maybe contingent property insurance or dependent property insurance. So let's just talk for a minute about what these are, because a lot of businesses didn't even know what these are up until a few months ago or even a few weeks ago. Business interruption insurance is insurance that's intended to compensate for income that's lost, and it's usually for physical damage to covered property. So that's probably not applicable in a pandemic situation, because most businesses aren't experiencing a loss of their property, like a flood, fire, tornado, that kind of loss. But there may be other type of damage. We're seeing some creative lawsuits being filed around the country right now in different states about how that property physical damage is defined and whether or not business interruption insurance could apply. Civil authority coverage is what it sounds like. It's when a government issues restrictions on a business, and that's exactly what we've had happen here. We've had restrictions on business closures. We've had restrictions on the number of people that can be in a business at one time. There have been some civil authority coverage issues that have been raised in multiple states. And as you can imagine, insurance carriers right now are claiming that if they were to cover businesses under any of these provisions, the insurance carriers are claiming they would go bankrupt. They'd go out of business if they had to cover everybody. So the insurance carriers are trying to find any and all reasons right now to completely deny anyone who tries to file a claim on their insurance for business interruption, civil authority based on government issued restrictions, and then even on contingent property insurance and dependent property insurance. This is interesting because that kind of insurance comes into play related to your supply chain. So this depends, it's interesting because there've been a lot of interruptions in our supply chain. A lot of people have been working from home. They've been stuck at home for the last couple months. If anyone has tried to order something from Amazon and you've noticed that it's been back ordered or it can't be delivered for another 3 to 4 months, or we don't know when it's going to be delivered, or perhaps you've been shopping online at some of your favorite local stores and they are out of product because supply chain interruptions. This is something that some businesses have this type of insurance coverage and others don't. It's really dependent on what you've put into place with your insurance carrier. But this is an interesting one because if you have not been able to open your business or to be able to reopen your business because you can't restock your shelves, you can't get your supplies in, this might be a policy or a clause in your insurance that might come into play. So we're watching some of these lawsuits as they're being filed around the country right now. As you can imagine, the attorneys are getting really, really creative with how to try to force the insurance carriers to cover these damages. We're also seeing some legislative action around the country. There are some states that are proposing new legislation that would force insurance carriers to cover damages to businesses who have these clauses or have the coverage, and enforce that coverage by insurance companies. So we're going to wait to see how that plays out. But I think it's interesting. I think that it bears mentioning that you ought to spend some time going through your policies, talk to your insurance provider, your insurance carrier, and see what clauses you've got in your coverage. You might find that you've got some of these clauses in your policies you might find that you've got some riders to your policies that might address some of these. And it's worth checking into this because we pay insurance as a business owner for a reason. So if there's a way for you to recoup on some of your damages and to recoup on those losses, you should check into that. On the next slide, so on the good news front, one of the things that we're really excited about right now is the new business opportunities and expansion opportunities that some businesses are finding. It's been a real fun area for us to work in because it's not so doom and gloom for us. You know, we're not addressing problems, we're helping to solve and find some solutions. It's really been an interesting time to see what kind of opportunities are presenting themselves. So one of the things that we're seeing a lot of businesses do is expand their online opportunities. If you're home, you're probably shopping online or have been for several weeks because you haven't been able to go out and shop normally like you wouldn't. So for local businesses to be able to put their supply and their storefront online and have an online storefront has been really critical. We personally, I can just share personally, my husband and my kids are all avid mountain bikers. So one of my husband's favorite stores is a locally owned mountain bike store. And that owner pivoted about 2 months ago in the first, I would say probably in mid-March when he saw what was happening. He pivoted, he got his website up and running, started selling his products online. My husband's been ordering all kinds of parts because he's been stuck at home. So he's been fixing our mountain bikes and doing all kinds of things, getting ready for the season, ready to get outside and get some fresh air and have some fun. So he's been ordering, and not only that, we've learned that a lot of their customers were so excited to be able to start purchasing online, and it was their local customers, which was really interesting. Not only were they able to expand into a greater customer base, but the local customers, the customers who were loyal to the local business owner, were happy to be able to connect with their local business through an online format. So those are some opportunities that have been great for some of the local businesses we're working with. There may be some opportunities in supply chain. How many restaurants have all of a sudden signed up with Grubhub or started with a brand new delivery service that they've never tried before? We've seen, I don't know if you've been following in the news, but Chick-fil-A pivoted, went to a completely outside service and their drive-through service. And here where we're at locally, their line around Chick-fil-A was wrapped around their business 3 times plus out into the street. They've now surpassed and all of the other fast food chains that are now number 2 in the world, right behind McDonald's. So there's some interesting things that businesses can look at as far as getting their products out. We've seen other restaurants that have started delivery services, hiring local folks who may have been laid off from other jobs, or being able to take their current employees and get them out delivering the products instead of maybe delivering it from kitchen to table. There's other creative supply chain industries as well. We've seen some new products and some new services pop up in the food supply chain, which has been really exciting. We're seeing some farm to person, direct farm to person, farm to individual supplies, and some businesses that are working with farmers and ranchers to create new associations where vegetables, meats, any kind of products that would normally be directed to mid suppliers that would typically go to restaurants would instead be delivered through services to local grocery stores or to individuals directly. We're finding that a lot of meat suppliers who are selling to the public are running out of supply. They've maybe got all of their cattle or their beef designated already. So it's been an interesting opportunity to look at how you can maybe retool the supply chain to get your products out there. Outsourcing, I kind of touched on that already. Outsourcing is another opportunity. There's all kinds of delivery services. There are folks out there who are looking for work. They want to work. And so finding ways that you can maybe bring on a 1099 subcontractor to where they could fill a position that you may now have open. Maybe you're building a new website for your store. You can hire and outsource for somebody who might be out of work from another job. There's a lot of great opportunity out there. One thing that's been really surprising for me and for a lot of other folks is how much opportunity there are for funding and investors right now. Investors aren't putting their money in the stock market. They're looking for other opportunities. And we are seeing more capital raises being completed. We're seeing investors courting companies to put their money in solid businesses that have got a plan and are continuing to perform their functions, their business, and increase and expand during this time. It's been an interesting time for us. We're doing more capital raises than we've done in such a short period of time. And we're seeing more investor groups courting certain types of industries, especially infrastructure and energy. Those are some interesting areas where we're seeing a lot of investment right now. And infrastructure is a big one. Infrastructure is seeing a lot of investment interest right now. Okay, on the financial management piece, I think this is probably a big issue for businesses, whether there's a pandemic or not. Financial management is key to running a good business. That's just the way it is. If your expenses are too high, your overhead's too high, and you're going to have a lower profit margin. That's just the way things generally are. Right now, income coming in may not be at the levels that it's been in the past. Your businesses have really been impacted. So I'm sure that everybody's already aware. There has been a lot of discussion about the CARES Act already, and Cindy did a fantastic job talking about what the Wyoming legislature has enacted. And I would just like to echo what Cindy said. These programs have been put in place for you, the business owner, because you have been impacted. You will be impacted throughout the year. There will probably be impacts that are going to be ongoing for some time. So all of these programs and these monies have been made available to you because you are the heartbeat of our communities. Without you, without our small businesses, our small communities would collapse. You provide income, jobs, supplies. You're critical to every aspect of our communities. So whether it's PPP money, the EIDL loan, whether it's the new resources that the Wyoming legislature has just enacted through the new programs, I really strongly encourage you to take advantage of the money and the programs that are out there. These are things that are designed to help keep the communities moving forward, and you are a critical piece of that. So let's talk briefly about some of these. I don't want to talk too much about them because I know that you've probably been inundated with the news and other information about some of these programs. But the PPP, I want to bring this up because just this last week, the government released, or the Small Business Association released the application for forgiveness for the PPP funds. I actually worked through that application myself when it came out over the weekend because I wanted to see how it works and what is this going to mean for our businesses. The thing that I like about the PPP is it appears to me, and we're still, of course, there's probably going to be further guidance because this is constantly in motion. Things are changing almost daily. But I liked that when I was going through that application, it appeared that even if all of the PPP isn't forgiven, some of it would be forgiven. And that's what it appeared to me like as I worked through that application. So if you received the PPP funds, that's some good news for you. The other thing that is great about the PPP is even if it's not forgiven, it's a cheap loan. It's a 1% interest loan. And that is that's almost free when you think about it. 1% is very, very little cost for that type of a loan, especially with the SBA. Because if any small business that has ever tried to apply for a loan with the Small Business Administration knows it's hard to do. And there's just so much red tape with that. The PPP and the EIDL both were much simpler applications than what you would normally go through with the SBA. So if you were able to receive PPP or EIDL loans, that's fantastic. That's cheap money. The interest rates are low. You can use that for reestablishing your business and getting your business back on its feet. If you can take advantage of any of the forgiveness on the PPP, that's a great thing. But regardless, it's great to have that. And Cindy talked quite a bit about the HB 1004 that the Wyoming legislature just passed. I am so excited when I read that bill. What an opportunity this is for Wyoming businesses. So I encourage you to get those applications in. As soon as those applications are issued, get those applications in for that money to make sure that you've got the necessary funding that you need to move your company forward. So in addition to all of these programs, it's a good time right now to look at your debts, your savings, and your cash flow. Businesses should be doing this on a regular basis anyway, but it might be worth sitting down with your CPA or your accountant and going through the list of debts, savings, cash flow, and see where adjustments can be made and seeing what kinds of options or opportunities you might have with that. Those are just some good things for businesses to think about. And then on the next slide, I wanted to talk about partnership and shareholder agreements. This is probably something that business owners are not thinking about, but they should be. If you have a partnership or shareholder agreement or an operating agreement, you may have some information or some clauses within those contracts that address capital calls, buy sells, reorganization, business valuations. There may be some hidden risks in there that would be triggered by the pandemic, and there might be some opportunities to renegotiate. So a few things that I'd like to just touch on with that are with regards to capital calls. Some businesses right now that are in a lot of tough situations with cash flow are issuing capital calls to their owners. And so you need to understand what specifically is required in those shareholder agreements or partnership agreements related to those capital calls. What can you do? What are you required to do? What if you can't meet that capital call? All of that is really dependent on your specific agreement. So it's a good idea to review those with your attorneys. Make sure you understand those if you are facing a capital call, or if that's something that you should consider to help raise cash or capital to keep your business moving forward, or possibly take advantage of an opportunity that's presented itself because of the pandemic. Some other things that are really important is the buy-sell agreement. Some business owners maybe don't even know what the buy-sell agreement is. A typical buy-sell agreement can be a standalone agreement, or it can be a clause within your partnership or shareholder agreements, bylaws, or operating agreements. Buy-sell agreement typically addresses what happens if an owner is incapacitated, is disabled for some reason, is sick and can't function or operate their portion of the business, and then if somebody passes away unexpectedly. So that if you don't have that, this is a good time to talk to your attorney to make sure that you get a buy-sell agreement put in place. It also says who can buy your shares out, who will manage your portion of the business if you can't. If you're in a partnership with somebody else and you get sick, who's going to take on your responsibilities? Is that going to fall to your partner? Is that going to fall to somebody else? Are there proxy voting clauses in there? There's just a lot of things that go into these buy-sell agreements. So it's a good idea to make sure that you understand what your agreement says, and if you don't have one, get one. And in some cases, these agreements may need to be reorganized. The businesses may need to be reorganized. If you're bringing in additional capital, maybe bringing in additional partners, reorganization can sometimes be an option. And sometimes we're also seeing businesses that maybe have been operating at a certain capacity for the past several years now have been hit by COVID. And if they're facing some sort of reorganization or capital or buy-sell issues, they may need to be reevaluated and looked at again as far as how are we going to evaluate a business that's been hit hard with COVID. There may be some hidden risks in your agreements that you're not aware of. So make sure you're familiar and you understand what those agreements require of you. And then if there's some things in those agreements that need to be renegotiated in light of COVID-19, get it done. Sit together with your partners, the shareholders, talk to your attorneys, and make sure that your agreements make sense, because business as usual is probably over. We're looking at a new normal, and so our agreements between our partnerships and shareholders are going to need to be updated to reflect some of those changes. And then last but not least, I would like to talk about succession planning. That's really, this is something that's been on the minds of a lot of people right now. Succession planning for businesses, estate planning for individuals. First of all, do you have your succession plan in place for your business? That's where your buy-sell agreement comes into play. Your buy-sell agreement is really going to be the nuts and bolts of how your business succession plan looks and what happens, who has the ability to inherit or take over your business or your interests in business, and then just simply looking at your personal estate planning. That's a big deal right now. Are your wills updated? If you have a trust, does that need to be amended? Are they current? Do they have current information? And then what about your employees? We've had several businesses reach out to us and ask if we could provide some succession planning, some estate planning for their employees. A lot of employees are worried right now about their wills. Do you have a power of attorney in case you are sick and you can't pay your bills? Who's going to pay your bills? Who's going to make those financial decisions for you? Power of attorney is critical to have those. If you don't have it, you need to get it. A medical power of attorney. This is something that people don't talk about very often, but it's really important. It can be a standalone power of attorney, or it can be combined with your living will. But the medical power of attorney addresses your medical decisions. If you are not able to make those decisions on your own, you want to make sure that you have an agent that you trust to make those medical decisions for you the way that you want them to be. And then last but not least is a living will. What's going to happen if you are do you want to be on life support? If you're at the end, how do you want your last few days to be handled? These are some really, really tough things to think about, and nobody likes talking about them. Nobody wants to think about death. Nobody wants to think about getting COVID and being, in the worst case scenario. But it's something that's really on people's minds right now, and it is concerning, especially when you're hearing stories of people who cannot go be in the hospital with their loved ones because the hospitals are on lockdown. I can share some personal experience we've been dealing with. My mother has been battling cancer all winter, and she had surgery finally in April. Things were kind of postponed because of COVID, but my father was not allowed to be in the hospital with her. And it was a scary couple of weeks for our family because nobody could be with her. Fortunately, she had her power of attorney, medical power of attorney, and living will, and all of her documents in place. So the hospital had copies of all of those documents, so that anyone who needed to be able to talk to the doctor about making medical decisions was able to, because right now, what's so scary is if you've got a loved one who is in the hospital, like we've been dealing with, um, nobody is there to talk to the doctor. There was times when I would get phone calls. I have medical power of attorney for my parents, and there were times when the doctor was calling me because my mom was, coming out of surgery or resting, and so the doctor would call me to update me on where my mom was at. Having that medical power of attorney in place for my family was so critical and helpful because we couldn't be there. And so it's one of those things. Again, it's uncomfortable to talk about. Nobody wants to even think about it. But I encourage you to talk to your estate planning attorney. And if you don't have one, call the Wyoming State Bar. They have a great list of attorneys in Wyoming that do estate planning. We do estate planning. But this is something that folks need to be considering. And it's been really interesting to see the local businesses who are able to offer this service for their employees right now. We're seeing several companies that have been able to maintain operations and are doing well and are healthy financially, and have been offering power of attorney, living will, medical power of attorney, and wills for their employees because employees are concerned. Employees are worried that if they come to work and they get sick, what happens? They need that job. They need that income to be able to feed their family. But if they get sick, who's going to make those decisions and what's going to happen? If they, if they are one of the most unfortunate ones related to COVID who end up passing away, and God forbid that would ever happen, but who's going to take care of their kids? These are some real scary things that people are dealing with, and it's uncomfortable. But there's some really great resources in Wyoming and fantastic attorneys who can help with this. So to leave this on a good note, there's some really positive things that businesses can do and are doing, and I'm so excited that I really, by seeing what the legislature passed, it's just really phenomenal. I mean, my hat's off to the Wyoming legislature. This has been a tough thing to decide, tough things to consider, and I'm just really excited that there's some opportunities for our businesses to move forward and to think about the future instead of being concerned and worried about the past and what's happened with COVID. So I encourage everyone, for the takeaway today is hope. There is a lot of opportunity, and there is a path forward for our businesses.
Thank you so much, Crystal. That is just a wonderful message to close on. It's something that is a tape that I play in my head daily, and it's something we really need to stay focused on right now because there is a lot to be concerned about, and I just so thank you for framing the issues so well for us to contemplate as business owners of steps that we can take. And again, these pieces are so crucial outside of a COVID environment as well. But what has been interesting is, the pandemic has forced us to really think about that preparation, that readiness, that ability to have steps in place in the event of something, if someone is incapacitated. And these are decisions that impact from the smallest organization all the way up to, global companies. My staff and I have these discussions all the time about, being such a small office, if one of us was unable to perform a business critical function, what would that look like? How would we plan for that? Are we ready? So thank you so much. And I'd like to see if we have about 15 minutes left, if we could open it up for questions. I have one to maybe get us started, unless anyone else wants to pipe in first, but not seeing anyone turn their camera on yet. I was wondering if you might be able to walk us through this. This is a question that I think is very germane for small businesses, and I know it's a very lengthy technical answer, but if you could maybe just try to hit the high points on, you mentioned bringing on some 1099 subcontractors to fill some vacancies. Can you help us walk through that distinction between when somebody falls in the 1099 category as temporary or subcontractor help versus when somebody has to be considered an employee?
Yeah, that's an important distinction to make. And The IRS actually has some requirements that would be placed on, I guess would define the distinction between an employee and a 1099 subcontractor. The big factor there to consider is, is it their primary source of income is one of the factors. Another factor is control. Typically when an employee works for a company, the employee has to meet certain requirements. The employer has control over the daily activities, how those activities and functions are performed. There's review. There's a certain amount of control. That's probably the biggest thing when a company hires a 1099 subcontractor. That element of control is typically not there. That's kind of one of those big things. The 1099 has more control over their performance. So you could think of this in terms of, my husband used to have a construction company, and so I always look at it in terms of, when he would hire subcontractors when he was building a home. He would hire a roofer because they had a certain expertise in roofing, and that roofer had the ability to contract and work on other jobs. So that's kind of the way that I always like to think about those things. If you were hiring an IT person as a subcontractor to get your business online, to create an online storefront, that IT person, if they're 1099 subcontractor, would typically have the ability to contract with other businesses and also do similar function out of their expertise. If they were an employee, then they would be typically working for you only. You would have control over the day-to-day functions of that person. So that's kind of a rough general distinction.
That's so helpful. Thank you. Because again, I mean, I know that's a question that many small businesses struggle with. They need some kind of temporary intermittent help, don't want to get in the business of having to stand up benefits and payroll and all this for just maybe an isolated project or a short-term assignment. So that's incredibly helpful. I'm sure others have questions for Crystal. Fantastic presentation. One of the things that I don't like about this GoToMeeting platform is that we don't